Some of these concepts here in Luke chapter 8 and some of the other texts that we're going to look at will help us be a little more prepared for those opportunities. So here's what's going on in Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8 contains 4 different episodes where Jesus encounters people in worst case situations. There in verses 22 through 25, they're about to die, so there's the threat of danger. Then there's this guy that we're going to look at today, there in 26 through 39, who is facing the danger of demons. The next girl, in verses 40 through 56, we're going to see really 2, we're not going to look at them today, but 2 different characters. One lady has a disease, and one lady is facing death. One person is facing death. Those are pretty worst case scenarios. And so what do those scenarios teach us about Jesus? And so going back to kind of catch us up, kind of now that we know the bigger context, there in verse 25, Jesus is crossing over from the Jewish side of the sea to the Gentile side of the sea when that storm happens. It's only a brief visit that Jesus will make here in Luke chapter 8, but it does, I think, anticipate the inclusion of the Gentiles, something that we will see later in the book of Acts. And there's so much about this story, this demon being cast out here in Luke chapter 8, that I just find interesting. That if you go back just 3 or 4 chapters to Luke chapter 4, Jesus cast out a demon, and that demon is cast out in a synagogue. This demon, this unclean spirit, is cast out from a clean place on clean soil. But this one is going to be cast out from an unclean place there in Gentile territory. And so as we begin, I want to think about this. As you guys were looking over the questions Thursday and Friday and reading this text and thinking about this text, what words or phrases describe the man before and after encountering Jesus? When you read verses 26 through 39, what words or phrases jump out to you? Start with before. Let's kind of focus in before as much as humanly possible. What phrases jump out before he encounters Jesus? What kind of condition is he in? Hone in on verse 27 if that helps a little bit. What? He's possessed with demons. That's right. Verse 27, the first description. He is possessed with demons. Jesus gets off the boat. The first thing he sees is a demon-possessed man. And the second thing it tells us there in verse 27 is what?
He's been living very sparsely.
Yeah. Sparsely where?
The tomb.
In the tombs. Okay, there's another thing it tells us about this man there in verse 27. So he's demon-possessed. He's living among the tombs. In my Bible, it's the line above in the tombs. If that helps you. Verse 27, chapter 8, verse 27. What's he wearing? Nothing. So Jesus gets off the boat here in Luke 8, verse 27, and he meets a demon-possessed man who has no clothes on, who lives in the tombs. Okay, just pause there. I would say picture the scene, but I'm not sure you want to picture the scene. What would you do in that situation? You walk into a grocery store, and you see this. What are you doing? You go downtown to Pike Place and you're doing some shopping at one of the marketplaces down there. You're getting some fresh veggies, getting some fresh seafood or something. What are you doing if you get off the train or you park your car in one of the parking garages and like the first thing you see when you get to Pike Place Market is a demon-possessed person who has no clothes on who's just left it. Yeah,
You do nothing because you're not trained
yeah,
to handle the situation.
yeah,
Not to go further past where you're teaching.
yeah,
If you try to correct or deal with that situation, you're gonna lose.
yeah,
Because Jesus tells his disciples later
yeah,
that when they went and tried to perform what he tried to perform, and they said, why didn't it work? He teaches them some things come by fasting and praying. So
yeah,
you have to fast and pray before you go to battle with a demon. This is not flesh and
Yeah.
blood. And
Yeah.
a matter of fact, these demons are numbered in the tens of thousands.
Yeah.
It's a legion.
yeah,
It's not one. He's fully filled with
yeah.
thousands.
Yeah, you're like, I love the connection to the prayer and fasting story. That's an interesting one thing to think about there, Fulton. So many interesting things to think about there. Yeah, I'm just be honest. My mind did not go there, but that is an interesting thought for me.
Great thought.
For me, one of the things I'm thinking of, if I see this, I'm getting on the other side of the street.
Yeah, exactly. Amen.
I've got a wife and kid that I need to protect, that I'm trying to avoid from danger. But that's not what we see Jesus doing here. Here, when Jesus sees this man who's demon-possessed, and the man comes out to meet him in verse 27, he has no clothes on, he's not staying in a house, he's staying in a tomb. So this guy is unclean, like at least 2 or 3 times over, because he's demon-possessed and he lives in the tombs, which are an unclean place, and he's in Gentile territory. And when he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him and said in a loud voice, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torment me." You know, one of the interesting things I see in the Gospels when Jesus encounters demons, maybe you've seen this before, is that when Jesus sees the demons recognize Jesus for who he is.
Amen.
Which is so interesting. Like, I'm starting a Zoom Bible study with the people in a Facebook group here in the Seattle area. And we were looking at Mark chapter 1 in our first study last Thursday. And that's one of the things that's so interesting, that in Mark chapter 1, Jesus is meeting the disciples, but he also meets one of these unclean spirits. Man with an unclean spirit there in Mark chapter 1. And the guy, the demon, recognizes immediately who Jesus is. Like, while the rest of the world is coming to grips with who Jesus is and what that means, in the Gospels, the demons see Jesus and what he's doing, and they go, "Oh boy, this party's over."
Amen.
Like, they recognize immediately. Even the demons, James 2, believe and tremble. That's what we see here. What do you see here, Chris?
Well, so I want to be fair about the Pike Place naked man, because Jesus' interaction here from the onset is between he and the demons of Satan. That's until verse 38, he doesn't even talk to the man.
Yeah.
That's when he talks to the man. So I want to be fair. He's dealing with a level of something that I don't think we're going to confront in that context. Now, that doesn't preclude us from the observation that Jesus does interact with people who, throughout his ministry, who we in society would deem unseemly or not desirable to approach, and we've got a huge thing that we've got to deal with to make sure that we're not doing that.
Yeah.
But in this particular context, it's he versus the demons,
Yeah.
and that's the narrative
Yeah.
that we're focused on. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that,
Yeah.
because I mean, it's easy to say, man, I think all of us would probably fail with the naked man in Pike Place.
Yeah.
You know, especially
Yeah.
if we had our families with us. I mean,
Yeah.
there'd just be a thing, but I don't think that's the measure here.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I had not considered that specifically, that it's not, because I had always kind of looked at verse 28 as he's engaging with the man who is demon-possessed, but you're pointing out perhaps that he is engaging first and foremost with the demon who happens to be in
Amen.
Right, in verse 38, then he's dealing with the man.
Yeah, the man in his right mind,
Right,
and that,
right.
yeah. So I see what you're saying now. That's an interesting thought. And so this whole story is just, I think that we're going to see some things as we continue to work through it, because this demon is confessing who Jesus is. He recognizes what Jesus is going to do and what he has the power to do. And while the rest of the world is kind of looking in the scope of the Gospels together as a whole, is trying to come to grips with who Jesus is and what he can do, the demons have no problem recognizing what he can do. In verse 29 it tells us, "For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was guarded, bound by chains and shackles, he would snap the restraints and be driven by the demon into deserted places." Again, I'm going to kind of humanize it just for a second, recognizing I think Chris may have a point there. I have a friend who works in law enforcement. And some of the stories he's told me about people who are high on some drug or involved in some drug, the interactions he's had, that it takes like 6 or 8 guys when people are on certain drugs. That's kind of what I'm envisioning here, this demon possessed, that he's just, when the demon is seizing him, like he goes into almost like the Incredible Hulk, for lack of a better term of phrasing it. Again, I'm living in 21st century America with the ability to turn on Disney Plus and watch Marvel movies, so that may be influencing my brain a little bit. And Jesus turns to the man and goes, "What is your name?" And legion, he said, which ties in with what Falk said a moment ago about we are many. In the ancient world, legion, a Roman legion, was something like 6,000 soldiers. Like, this is not a guy with just one demon. I'm like, one demon would be bad enough. Like, no one wakes up in the morning and says, "I hope I get demon possessed." Just one demon will be good enough. And so the point I think that Luke is making here, and the story he's trying to make, is this is a really, really bad situation. But as the story progresses, the severity of his situation here in Luke chapter 8, I think, underscores and emphasizes the power of his redemption as the story progresses, because the reason we're looking at this story is because Jesus has the power to cast out the demon. And so Jesus is talking, we are many. There's a lot of them. And the demons, begged him not to banish him into the abyss. They recognize who Jesus is. They recognize what he can do. They recognize his authority. The disciples, in some of the stories we look at in the Gospels, don't recognize Jesus. They don't recognize Jesus' authority. They have this struggle on who he is and what he can do, but these demons, they don't. Don't throw us into the abyss. Instead, permit us to enter the pigs. That's interesting on so many levels. Why is it interesting they asked to go into pigs? Have you ever thought about that?
They want to be in another host.
Yeah.
The demons are actually the fallen angels.
Yeah. They need another place to go.
Right.
So where are they going to go? The pigs. So Jesus has crossed over into Gentile territory. He's met this demon. The demons want to go into pigs. Are pigs clean or unclean animals, according to Jews? Unclean. So these unclean spirits want to go into unclean animals. Furthermore, if I remember correctly, the boar or the wild pig was the symbol of the Roman legion based there in Palestine. So that's also interesting. Another layer to the detail to the story here in the text. And so they rush off to the pigs. And I've often envisioned this almost being like a football field away. Not very far at all. But I came across some people who suggested that the region where Jesus is, that he's crossed over, and he's maybe made his way a little further inland, that this may be a little farther than a football field. I think one place suggested several miles. I haven't spent a truckload of time around pigs, but I haven't noticed pigs in my very limited time around them to be highly energetic creatures. And yet what are they doing in the story? they're running, as we're going to find out, straight into the sea. Jesus casts them out. The herd rushes down the steep bank into the lake, and they all drown. Which is interesting because Jews also believed that demons would go into waterless places. That's one of their little beliefs about the demons. Yeah.
So the demons beg him not to throw them into the abyss.
Yeah.
And so then the question is, what is the abyss? And Revelation gives us kind of a
Yeah.
snapshot of that. So
Yeah.
these demons who are eternal creatures,
Yeah.
who have for a time been allowed to roam the earth and possess
Yeah.
people, would rather go into pigs that are going to be doomed eventually
Yeah.
than to be cast into the place that's the destiny for all who don't bow their knee to Christ.
Yeah.
That's a pretty serious
Yeah.
thought.
That is I had not thought about that. So let's unpack that for a second. Facing their judgment at the authority of Jesus, they're doing everything they can to go to that place of torment. So what does that tell us about torment? These demons are doing everything possibly can to delay. Send us into pigs. We would rather spend the rest of our existence in pigs than that place. That is a thought I had not considered. I like that. In fact, I did have a note in my notes that was believed by the Jews in this time period that the demons would be gathered up cast into the bottomless abyss. You mentioned Revelation 20 and verse 3. There's a couple of extra biblical texts that talk about that as well. And so this exorcism teaches us and shows us that no opponent, even an opponent that has tons, is consumed by demons, is stronger than Jesus. That's interesting. That when Jesus acts and he speaks, and he, if I can use this terminology if you'll allow me to, saves this demon-possessed man, casts the demon out, he becomes sane and rational. And I think it was Fulton who brought this up a moment ago. And he becomes in his right mind. And so how does the village respond? Put yourself in their shoes one more time just for a second. If you, outside your village, somewhere in the tombs, was a naked man who was demon-possessed, I mean, most of us don't spend a lot of time in graveyards. I have an aunt and uncle who I understand spent their first either date on their honeymoon or first date in a graveyard, which is interesting to think about for a couple of reasons. That's, as I remember it, my details may be a little fuzzy. But we don't make a habit of hanging out in graveyards today. Like even today, there's a graveyard on my grandfather's farm. Hasn't been touched in 200 years. That area of the farm is spooky. Like, I don't like going there in dark. Like, it's just weird. I can see the lights of the football field. I know where I am. It's not too far away from the highway. It's spooky. It's weird. We don't spend time around graveyards. So if you're in the first century and you're a Jewish person or a Gentile person and you're living in this city, are you making it a habit to go talk to this guy? Are you making it a habit to go anywhere near this guy? Well, if you're living in the first century and you know this guy is out there in the graveyards and you have two different ways you can go to your destination, are you going by the graveyard or are you going the long way? Most of us are going to take a couple extra steps to avoid the demon-possessed guy. And yet the people went out to see what happened because remember, they just lost a lot of pigs. They just lost their crop. They just lost their herd. That was their business. And so the swine owners come into the city and say, guys, I know you needed some pigs for sacrifice to the Roman gods. I know you were looking forward to having pork chops for dinner tonight. But we just lost it. So the down payment you put for your pork chops, it's gone. And the people went out to see, verse 35, what happened. And how do they respond when they came to Jesus and found the man the demon had been departed from, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind? Where was he at the beginning of the story? He was not in his right mind. He was naked and by the tombs. This guy has been totally transformed. And how do the people respond? I missed a question. How do the people respond when they see? They're frightened. Why would they be frightened? Why aren't they celebrating? This guy they've been avoiding for the longest time has been healed. He's been saved. He's been transformed. Why not celebrate?
It's the same sort of thought stream that ended up getting Jesus killed.
Yeah.
Because he was doing stuff that they did not know what to do with,
Yeah.
and it frightened them,
Yeah.
and they wanted to stop it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me. How is he doing this?
Yeah.
If he can do this, what else can he
Yeah.
do? It's frightening.
That amount of power is frightening. In fact, my Bible says there at the end of verse 35, they were afraid.
They're totally afraid.
Seeing that much power in Jesus frightened them. And meanwhile, eyewitnesses reported to them how the demon-possessed man was delivered. And all the people of the Gerasene region asked him to leave them. So they're frightened, and they come out to Jesus and say, okay, we're scared. How did you do this? What's going on? Like, we've never seen anything like this. Instead, they don't have that attitude. Instead, they come out and say, we're scared. We don't know how you did this. We don't want to know how you did this. And instead, they're like, get out of town. And so getting into the boat, he returned. Contrast their fear, just really quickly here in the text, with the demon-possessed man. There in verse 35, it says that he was sitting at Jesus' feet. And there in the text, as the story goes on, the demon-possessed man, begs Jesus earnestly, my translation says, to be with him. To sit at Jesus' feet, to be with him. Do those words, those phrases jump out to you for any reason? Isn't that the language of discipleship? That when Jesus calls the disciples, one of the things it says there in the Gospels is he's calling them to be with him. And when you think about and kind of expand to extra-biblical Jewish literature and look at some of the rabbinical literature, the idea of sitting at someone's feet was discipleship language on the level of, sitting and saying, I'm learning from you, Rabbi, I'm learning from you, teacher. That's the phraseology that they used. And so while the community, or the people, while these Gentiles are completely scared about the authority of Jesus and what they've just seen and what they've just witnessed and what they've just heard about, this man says, I'm going to follow you. You've changed my life. Todd, you see your hand popping.
Yeah.
Is that a false start? What's going on in your head?
No. So, I think what's, Jesus didn't tell him to go away. Don't bother me, kid. He didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
He did something, I think, even more incredible than allowing the guy to sit at his feet, to follow him. He gave him a job. One that he has given to all of us, actually. But I think this is one. I think this is the first time. You'll correct me, I'm sure, where he says, "No, you don't sit next to me. I've got things to do, and so do you.
Yeah.
And this is what you're doing. And I think this is the first time this has happened, but
I can't think of another one, but I'm not saying it doesn't exist, just off the top of my head. But I do like the overall observation you've made there, Todd. That rather saying, okay, welcome to the club. You're going to follow me around for whatever's left of my ministry. You're going to learn from me. He's given a commission here. If you will, almost a great commission. It's not the Great Commission as we often talk about it. But he's told to go tell, verse 39, all that God has done for you. Yeah.
Well, in the Jewish territories, his command often is be quiet.
Yeah.
That's
Go
exactly
do what's right, just be quiet
what
about
I
it.
was thinking too.
But now that this is his not his first time, his entree into the Gentile, the broader Gentile community. He's shown something amazing that they can relate to, they fear it, and his love for the Gentiles is expressed here, but he doesn't have the same challenges that he's dealing with the Jewish aristocracy and the different things going on there. And so his is wide open.
Yeah.
He's like, you know, what I want you to do, you're living proof that I am from God, and
Yeah.
I want you to share the good news with everybody.
So let's unpack that, because I think you bring up something very interesting there, Chris. That if you think about Jesus when he does similar miracles and people want to follow him, you have in the Gospels what scholars will often call the messianic secret. When Jesus looks at people and says, "Don't tell anybody what I've done." And as Chris has just said, there's a reason for that. Because there's the Jewish leaders to deal with. There's also in the first century Judaism, Second Temple Judaism at the time, a lot of preconceived notions, a lot of preconceptions about the Messiah and who the Messiah is and what the Messiah would do. And so the moment you start saying the Messiah has come, there are going to be a lot of people, and we see this even in the Gospels, a lot of people out there who are going to be like, "Oh, he's come? The Son of David's back? Grab your swords, grab your bows. Let's go to war. We're going to overthrow the Romans. We're going to be independent today." There were a lot of people who had that struggle. There were a lot of preconceptions. And so Jesus kept his messianic nature a secret often, to be clear, especially when in terms of commissioning others to proclaim that message, so it wasn't misunderstood. And then in Gentile language, you don't have those preconceptions. And so he sends this man out with a mission to go back home and tell everyone what God has done for him. But now in this region of the Gerasenes, in a region that was unclean, in a region that the gospel wouldn't get there to for a couple more years, maybe even a decade or more, depending on how the timeline works. A man who's saying, "Hey, there's this Jesus. And this Jesus worked incredible miracles for me. That I was a demon-possessed guy. I was controlled by legions of demons. And now I'm in my right mind." Someone laying the groundwork, laying the foundation, so when the gospel does go to the Gentiles, people are ready and they're willing and they're able to respond. Yes, Steve, what's going on?
I really like Chris's observation, because this is just a snapshot, just a quick little snapshot of God's complete control of this entire situation. Everything that happened exactly as his purpose, in his own time, exactly the way that he wanted it to happen. I think to see any of these things and not see it as just an expression of, I'm sending my son to die exactly the way I want him to die, for exactly the reason I want him to die. At times I'm going to slow this process down,
Yeah.
at times I'm going to speed it up,
Yeah.
but I'm in control,
Yeah.
total control.
Yeah. And that's the thing, what I want us to see as we read the Gospels, and I hope you've maybe seen this in your own personal study before, is that Jesus, God, is in complete and total control from the start. And as we read the Gospels, which you've heard me say this phrase before, I'll say it again, because I just really like it. The Gospels are passion narratives. They are suffering narratives with a long introduction. That if you look at the 4 Gospels, they spend like a third of their time, all 4 of them, third plus, on the last 7 days of Jesus' life. We get 2/3 of the Gospels are on the first 30 years, first 33 years, the last third of the Gospels on the last 7 days. There's a reason for that. Because Jesus came on God's time, in God's way, and he was going to die when it was the right time, for the right reason. And there was nothing that man could do to expedite. God was in control the entire time. And so, even throughout Jesus' ministry, we get these snapshots of Jesus' overall mission. Then in Luke chapter 2, Mary says, I think it's Mary, Luke chapter 2, that there would be a light, he would be a light to the nations. And we see Jesus healing and having conversations with Gentiles throughout his ministry, people who the rest of the Jewish world would have walked right past. We see here that Jesus has this conversation with this demon-possessed man and heals this demon-possessed man. And then once he's healed, I am presuming just for a second that this man who is demon-possessed, who is in Gentile territory, is very likely a Gentile. And he gives this, I don't see it specifically in the text, so I'm making a presupposition here, okay? He gives this Gentile man a commission to proclaim, if you can allow me to use this term, the gospel as he knows it in the town where he lives. Yes, Jesus is going to die in his time, in his way, for his purpose. But he is setting the groundwork. He is setting the foundation for the spread of the gospel to the nations throughout his ministry. And so for a minute, we got about 10 minutes or so left, 5 minutes or so left in class. How does this passage redefine what sharing your faith or my faith can look like? As we think about this demon-possessed man specifically, how does it redefine what it looks like to share our faith? Steve, your hand.
Yeah, I'm
I can't.
gonna go someplace. I'm reasonably certain it's not what you're looking for. So I was waiting for somebody else.
You're the one who's moving the hands like you're leading singing, so we're going to go to you.
So, sharing your faith, I guess, is the springboard that I'm going to on this. I've always found this passage, this section of Scripture, really interesting. And it took me a long time to kind of work my way through it to where it made sense to me. But I've said this often, and it continues to be what I keep trying to come to grips with. That passage in Romans that talks about God is just and the justifier. That one just continues to occupy my headspace.
Mm-hmm.
I get the justifier part, it's the justness that I keep trying to come to grips with. And you could, for some time, I took this passage and said, something's wrong with this story. That man who was demon-possessed didn't have a fair shot at salvation. There's something unjust about this story. And it took me a while to work our way through that, but to go to a modern day application, there are absolutely people today that are living in mental health situations, and you could make a case they don't have a shot at it. But the overarching issue is that God has announced himself for all times, he is just. And so to take this demon possession as a way to say, this doesn't look just to me, how could God, that guy didn't have a fair shot at it, God's not just. You can make that same application today, is my point.
Mhm.
And yet, I absolutely believe that God is just. So that tells me that I have to accept that there's situations that are in God's custody that aren't in mine, and I don't need to understand everything. God is just. And those people that are in mental health places today, God's got a plan for them. God's got a way home for them. God is absolutely going to be just. In a weird way, once I worked my way through this story, I ended up in a place that was very faith-building to me, to see this guy didn't have a shot at it, but God dealt with it.
Yeah.
And there's other people that don't appear to have a shot at it, but God's got it. In His own time, in His own way, He will absolutely be just. I ended up kind of loving the story, even though in the beginning I didn't like it at all, because it made no sense to me.
Yeah.
I think this is just an expression of God's justness.
You pointed that out, the just and the justifier theme. Has anybody else noticed that Steve likes to point that out in classes? And I'm glad he's pointed that out, because it does give us hope in all those situations that we face and the uncertainty, that we can trust that our God is just and He justifies. And understanding and living with that tension, if you'll allow me to use that term, is faith building, to realize that we don't all have all the answers, but God does. What else does this passage teach us about sharing? Yeah.
So, this guy obviously had got very little information from Jesus,
Yeah.
right? He didn't have much time to spend with it.
Yeah.
Yet he's being told, go out and share with whom you can what God has done for you.
Yeah.
You don't need to be a Bible scholar, right, to share the message.
Don't?
Yeah, this guy probably had, what, 10 minutes with him maybe?
Yeah.
Who knows?
No, but you're spot on.
Hour?
Yeah, you're spot on. And that really is really the kind of answer in my brain. Is like, this guy has 10 minutes with Jesus. And in that 10 minutes with Jesus, however long the conversation actually happened, that's, how much that Luke records versus how much we don't see in the recorded text. But he has like precious human time with Jesus. And yet Jesus saves him and commissions him. And his message is, hey, let me get into the finer points of biblical theology. Is that his message? Is that his commission? No. Go tell what Jesus has done. Tell what God has done for you. And so no matter where we are on our faith journey, that if we are a child of God and we have an opportunity to talk to someone about Jesus, we don't have to give like the finer points of biblical theology. We just have to tell somebody what God has done for us and how He's impacted our life. Chris?
That is the Great Commission. It doesn't say teaching them and baptizing them. It says baptizing them and teaching them all the things that I've commanded you. That process is much more experiential than it is doctrinal to begin with, because it's a transformation process that's taking place.
Yep.
And that's what you're expressing. You're expressing what Jesus has done for you, and who Jesus is, and that's compelling to people, and should be compelling to people. And then from that point, they continue to learn, because Jesus is the Word. But we, and I, over time, have often flip-flopped that. I want to prove to them. We're going to look at the Bible and prove to you. But that's really, convince them. Yeah, I'm going to convince you. I know you don't believe it now, but after I get through with this argument, you're just going to be nuts. Yeah. But it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
It's, what, I was lost in my sins. I was bound by the demons of sin, and Jesus loosed me of that and gave me mercy and grace that I could never attain myself, and I'm reconciled with Him. God be praised.
I think this is also a good lesson for the disciples, because they were with him And I'm sure they were very hesitant to go into this Gentile area. Probably more hesitant, like, oh my word, this guy's a lunatic, and you're dealing with him. And then they see what he did for him.
Yeah.
And they like, oh, it's kind of the glimpse into maybe this is just not for the Jews,
We're-
right? Maybe there's something else. I'm sure they didn't understand that at the time, but I think it was the start of the journey for them.
Think
Because
about,
they go back,
yeah,
right?
they go back and what are they remembering years later?
Yeah.
The experiential thing. Y'all remember what Jesus did over in the Gerasenes? There was that guy, Legion, and what he did for him? Wow. And whatever disciple, whatever Christian eventually went to that territory and preached the gospel in that territory, I wonder if they ever encountered. We're venturing into theoretical, I get that. What happened? And so these ideas are coming together, especially like the last couple of minutes, especially are where my mind's at. That if you come into contact with somebody you knew in high school, and they're like, wait a second here. You're nothing like I saw in high school. Like you were a crazy train in high school. What's the difference? What changed? Jesus.
Jesus.
Or you meet somebody out in the community and something goes wrong, you're in a car wreck and you're like, you're fine, I'm fine, this is just a car, we're good. How can you handle this with such kind of, well, Jesus? When you, as one of my friends did, lose your son in a tragic drowning accident when he is in college, how do you cope with that? Jesus, to the point that the firefighters who recovered his body from the lake noticed and talked to me about it in the gym. It's the times in our life where that massive transformation happens. And we can just say it's Jesus. I'm in a Zoom, it's ended for the summer, Bible class with people in the area, broader area, Seattle area. And several of them, as so many people we know already, the economy has really taken a toll of the IT world, especially. So if you have friends or family members who work in IT, you know this already. And so a couple of them, there's like 10 or 12 guys in this group, 2 or 3 of them maybe, 4 of them, lost their jobs in layoffs. And what was so shocking to me is every last one of us like, you know what? Jesus got this. God's got this. And that was just like massively eye-opening to me. That you have these people who just lost their jobs. Seattle's not a cheap place to live. I would be freaking out if that happened to me. And they're like, Jesus got this. That's a powerful witness. To go back to what Chris said, sometimes sharing our faith is experiential and just telling people what Jesus has done for us and the change he has impacted and influenced in our life. And so the thought I want us to leave on tonight, today, is to think this week, this is not for us to talk about, but think this week, what part of your story could God use, could you use to point others to him? How can you use your story to tell others about the gospel and what Jesus has done? That's the end of class. We'll pick up next week. Be ready for questions